Today I'm going to be sharing some tips on how to paint or draw eyes to look more realistic. The first thing we want to start with is a decent reference photo. Usually, if you're just drawing from memory, you may think you remember what an eye looks like, but it probably isn't going to come out right. So always start with a good reference photo. Let's go see if I can get my husband to model for us. Hey husband, can you?
Hello?
Okay, so it might be easier just to go find a reference photo on Pixabay. My first tip for you is watching the whites of the eyes. We think whites of the eyes, they're just going to be white. No, they really aren't. The only white, like pure titanium white that you're going to have in your piece, whether it be in color or in charcoal like I'm using here, is going to be for the bright highlight on the eye. Or if you're going for that really glossy look where you have maybe dots on the tear line where the light is catching the moisture there. So watch for that. The whites of the eye are not pure white. And you'll see that as I move through here. Watch how dark I'm going to shade this, and it's going to make it look much more realistic. If you're working in color, the color area, I usually will use a lot of kind of a reddish brown tone or browns, grays. They're just not going to be flat white. My next tip for you, watch the tear line. This is an area that is often skipped. This area right here, don't leave this out, because then when you go to add your eyelashes, they would basically be coming straight out of the eyeball. No hairy eyeballs is tip number 2. Make sure that you include this tear line. It will make a huge difference in your work. And I'm doing a little bit of a highlight here, so it's not just a straight even line from one end of the eye to the other. You can see we've got some variation with the shading there. Also notice that shaded area on the inner corner of the eye. So the white of the eye does not go corner to corner. Right here, make sure that you are leaving that. If you're working in color, you're typically going to be using pinks, grayish pinks, tans, browns, but make sure to include that. Do not make that white of the eye go straight through to that inner corner. For those of you who are members over at Patreon, you can follow along with this in real time if that is something that interests you. It is available over there. I will have the link in the video description. My next tip for you is on shading the eye. You don't want to leave it right here. Look how scary it looks. It looks like the subject is just staring at you, like there's some substances involved in that look. So we don't want that. It doesn't look good. Let's soften the look by creating a shadow under the upper eyelid. Now, there will be exceptions to this, mainly depending on the lighting, but in most cases, on most portraits, and this is going to be true for the majority of animals too. Again, there are exceptions, birds and such, but you're going to typically have a shadow right under the upper eyelid. It's going to go over the iris and the white of the eye. So here I'm just taking that shadow and I'm going to pull that down. Look how it completely changes the expression. So it doesn't look like there are illegal substances involved in this person's life right now. Look how nice and soft that shadow is. And again, it goes over the white of the eye too. Look how dark the whites of the eyes have become now. We really want to make sure we're getting good shading in there. Now, if you were doing something where you wanted the subject to look terrified, that would be another case where you may want to leave out some of that shading, let it look more like it's staring at you, that very scary stage. So there's a time that may be useful for you. I'm going to go ahead and add the white highlight here. Now, this is going to be the brightest area of the entire portrait, or, well, eye. I guess it's not a full portrait. I don't know my words. That's not what you're here for. I'm going to go ahead and shade that down again. Now notice that the white of the eye too, how it curves. It's not just a dot, it's not just a straight line. It is slightly curved, and that's going to help the eye to look more like it's a sphere inside the head. We don't want this to look like a flat surface. So if you can curve just slightly the shine of the eye, that's going to make a big difference too. My next tip is going to be for the eyelashes. This seems to be where things go terribly wrong for many people who are getting started. Now, watch the shape of the eyelashes. They're not separated like this. And just adding more lines like that isn't really going to make it look any more realistic. What you want to do with the eyes, a couple of things, or the eyelashes, you want them to be slightly curved. You also want to make sure that they are coming together in almost these triangle points. See how you've got these clumps? It's just like when we paint fur on animals. You get these almost clumps and clusters. So as we start with the eyes or the eyelashes on the eye, watch that these connect together like that. The other thing that I often see people do is make a ridiculous amount of eyelashes. Unless the subject is wearing false eyelashes, that's not usually how it's going to look. Here I put some dots just so I knew how far up I wanted each of these eyelashes to come. See how I'm starting with the individual lines. Look how they curve down on the upper lid, down over the actual eyeball there. Watch that curve. It's not just coming straight out from that upper eyelid. So now that I've got these individual lines in there, I'm going to come through and start building that up. Watch how this connects. So I've got 2 strands that connect together, and you're going to do 2 to 3 strands on most that will meet at a point. This is going to give you a much more natural look. Really avoid that spider eye that some people struggle with their mascara. We want to typically avoid that, having it too clumpy, too much. Or again, with the false eyelashes, these days we do see some people kind of overdoing it, having a little too much fun with those false eyelashes. Watch that in your portraits because it looks a bit ridiculous usually if you overdo those eyelashes. You don't need a whole lot. Yes, some people will have more than other people, but really be careful on this because you can have the most perfectly shaded eye, the most perfectly drawn eye, and absolutely ruin it with those eyelashes. So always start with less and add more as needed. But really look how these group together. That is a huge, huge deal and will make an enormous difference on whether or not your eye has a more realistic look or looks like someone who's just using mascara for the first time. Now the bottom eyelashes are going to be a bit different. Typically, you want to make these lighter. Do not go as dark as the upper eyelashes or as heavy. There shouldn't be as many. And this is where that tear line was so important. Look where these come from. They don't come straight from the eyeball. They're coming from that bottom tear line. So these want to curve as well. You don't want a bunch of straight lines. And I'm doing the same thing where I'm doing just a few, and then I can add more and create that clump of 2 to 3 little hairs connecting together at a point. But even if somebody was wearing heavier makeup, usually if they're good with makeup, the bottom lid or bottom lashes will not be as heavy as the upper lashes. So this subject does not have very heavy eyelashes. It's always safer, start lighter and add more as needed. But if you do have someone who is wearing more makeup, you are obviously going to go darker than this, but you're still going to form those eyelashes in a very similar way where you've got 2 to 3 individual hairs that meet at the end and are slightly curved. And again, watch that bottom tear line. You will have exceptions depending on the angle of the subject or just the way that the subject's tear line is. But so you may not see as much as you do here, or you may see more. So really watch your reference photo and watch that on your subject. My last tip for you today is on the eyebrow. Don't make this one solid black Sharpie marker looking brow. You're going to have some individual hairs, but not everything individual hairs either. So those are 2 issues that I often see where somebody will do like this, where it's just almost one solid layer. We're building on this, but leaving it like that would be a problem. But also trying to make it so that every single hair in the eyebrow shows will also not look good. It's not going to look natural. So what I'm going to start with is just a base layer. Now notice that I've got lighter and darker areas. This is a big deal. Look at your reference photo and you'll see almost blotches where the eyebrow is a little bit lighter or a little bit darker, especially if the subject is not wearing makeup. If they filled in their eyebrow with makeup, it is more likely to be solid. Or more solid than this anyway. But you should still have some variation on where is the light and the dark. Once you get those general shadows in, now I can come through and start building up some of these individual hairs. But don't overdo it and really look at your reference photo. Which direction are those hairs moving in? It's not going to be the same for everybody. And I think we have a tendency to want to make everything too perfect. These lines all go the same direction. They don't. Really look at that reference photo, at everywhere where those each individual hair, how it changes direction. And then in this case, his eyebrows, look how they come down a little bit into the skin. So it's not this perfectly manicured line all the way around. You've got a few individual straggler hairs that will come further into and above or below and above that eyebrow. I'll go ahead and speed that up, and you can really see as I start to build the individual hairs. There are some, not too many. This is going to be the case most of the time when you do anything when it's in relation to hair, whether it be the hair on the head, or let's say you're drawing fur on an animal. You're typically going to have your major shadows, your lights and your darks, and then those few hairs on top of that. You're not generally going to try and draw or paint every single hair. It usually won't look right. You'll usually come up with something that looks like oily, like greasy zombie hair. Few last details. You can see I can come through now and add a bit more on the eyelashes. So always start with less and slowly build up to adding more, because if you add too much too soon, that's going to be a really hard thing to fix. Now, as I finish this up, notice it's not really about a ton of tiny, tiny detail. That's not generally what's going to make the difference in whether or not it looks realistic. Really focus on your values. Like always, are your lights light, and if your dark's dark enough, and then apply these tips to just the general shape. Where do you add those highlights? Where do you add shadows and the eyebrows and eyelashes? And that should make a really, really big difference in how realistic your eyes look. More detail is not necessarily the answer.
So, like this?
No, that's not what I said. No.
Oh, right, you said more shading. So, like this. Shading tools. Shade all the things. Gotta be so good. So, like this. Draw some eyelashes, just like you said. This is perfect. Maybe more. I think it could use more. They curve and meet together like this. You said dark on the bottom, right? And more? Just add more. Just keep adding more until it looks good. You say layer till it looks good, so more. Just needs a highlight. That's all it needs. If I added a highlight, it would look good. Look, it's perfect. Like this, right?
Still no. Have you subscribed yet? If not, I have a handy button right there. It's round, has an orange arrow going towards it. If you clicked on that, YouTube may or may not let you know when I have new videos go up. So also click on the bell notification icon to be a little bit more sure that they notify you, and my email newsletter that I send out once a week with updates for all the videos that week, along with some art motivation.